Because prohibition of marijuana certainly doesn't work. I'm going to tell you about that. Prohibition of marijuana has created the most cataclysmic criminal enterprises around the world, all because of government policy. That wouldn't. But anyway, so sales are in. William Shakespeare, the greatest writer in the English language, smoked pot. Actually, he didn't smoke pot, I mean, he smoked hashish. William Shakespeare was into cannabis sativa. I know the scientists who have tested his pipes. He smoked other things too. But he definitely smoked hashish, and it's verifiable. By the way, everything I am telling you is true, and you can verify it tonight when you go on a computer. Just take keywords, Shakespeare and hashish, or Shakespeare and cannabis, and you'll find out exactly what I'm telling you. You'll be able to see pictures of those pipes. You'll be able to see read the scientific reports of what Shakespeare was smoking in those pipes. The greatest writer in the English language smoked cannabis. The greatest developer of computer technologies, both of them, were potheads. Every single song you've ever had on that iPod. The Beatles smoked marijuana, lots of it. And Bob Dylan, he introduced it to him. Bob Dylan, the greatest poet of the modern era, was a pothead. Paul McCartney and the Beatles wrote 32 songs with references to marijuana, and they wrote one song entirely all about marijuana called Got to Get You Into My Life from Sgt. Pepper. Check that song out. It's all about marijuana. Paul McCartney, he just gave a concert in Halifax, and the man looks 36 years old, not 66. And that's because he smokes a big bomber every day. George Harrison smoked 2 packs of cigarettes, and he died years ago of lung cancer. He did not smoke marijuana the latter part of his life. Paul McCartney smokes a big bomber every day. Led Zeppelin, the greatest rock and roll band ever, smoked a lot of pot, and Robert Plant still smokes a lot of pot, and so does Jimmy Page. If you find the oldest picture available of Robert Plant, he's at a pot rally in 1967 with a sign that says legalize pot, and that's before he was in Led Zeppelin. Rolling Stones, certainly one of the top 3 greatest rock and roll bands, still smoke a lot of pot. I happen to know this very personally because their daughters, Theodora Richards and Lizzie Jagger, came into my shop, and we became acquainted and friends, and then they bought a whole bunch of old pictures of marijuana. And I said, well, wow, what's this doing? You're buying $3,000 worth of old print. They said, well, each of our dads has his own castle. And we've both been given the wonderful assignment of decorating one room full of weed paraphernalia in both of them. Right? So Mick Jagger and Keith Richards not only are successful as potheads, but they have a whole room in their castle devoted to marijuana, hookahs, and hashish, and things of the like. But why stop at those 3? Every single major artist you're going to be able to talk to me about, every reggae artist, Bob Marley, by the way, who's the leading icon to people, oppressed people around the world. Bob Marley is the most recognizable image anywhere on this planet to oppress people around the world. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Because they know the truth. Oppressed people know it's all about the thumb of oppression coming down on them. And the closer we get to the truth, the more we get to our oppression, as I certainly know. Bob Marley, one of the greatest icons to oppress people around the world, certainly smoked a lot of pot. You know what? That guy had 12 children. If anybody ever tells you smoking pot makes it turn out weird, you'll know. Every single one of Bob Marley's 13 children is a musical genius. Stephen Marley, Damian Marley, Kira Marley, Ziggy Marley. It's amazing. I've met 4 of his kids. They're all amazing. And they all smoked a lot of pot, the mothers, when they were pregnant. And they had a father who smoked huge bombers every day, splits the size of my fist every day. In fact, Bob Marley said typically he went through a pound a week of marijuana personally. All right? Wow. Every reggae artist smokes pot. Every hip-hop artist smokes pot. Jazz music is all about the music of pot. Jazz music is reefer music. You know, and that's where all the trouble started. Because the first time black people and white people in America could be seen in the same room without one being the servant or slave of the other was in the 1920s. It took that long. And it was still pretty risky. You know, these beautiful, handsome black men in their suits were playing this voodoo music with this strange reefer. And of course, it was the first time where young white people could go to see these musicians. And of course, it was very impressive. Duke Ellington was a pothead. Louis Armstrong was a pothead. Every major jazz artist since that time is a pothead. And that's when white women first saw these musicians, and that's when trouble happened. Because, you know, America was a very segregated place. You know, up until the 1960s, if you can believe it, after I was born, black people still had to use their different washrooms than white people. They had to use different restaurants than white people. They had different schools than white people. They had different clubs than white people. Black people could never be seen anywhere where white people frequented up until the early 1960s. They were called the Jim Crow laws, these separate but equal facilities. Black people weren't even allowed to see a white person in a hallway, in a hall to dance hall. So in the 1920s, it changed one way, is that the jazz music was all done, this hot new jazz was all done by black people, because it was inspired by marijuana, which would arrive in the places starting in New Orleans in 1905, or St. Louis, places on the Mississippi Delta, where black people and the dock workers started collecting this marijuana and taking it to their friends. And of course, black people had to live in their own ghettos. Black people and white people never lived together in a community. White people lived in entirely separate neighborhoods, and black people lived in their entirely separate neighborhoods. It was a completely apartheided community in the United States until the 1950s and early 60s. It's pretty incredible. So when these jazz musicians are playing away, and alcohol's illegal, by the way, we've got prohibition and gangsters, I'll talk to you about that later, because it's pivotal. But when white women first saw these beautiful, handsome black men playing this incredibly seductive music, yes, you know what happened. Some black and white people got together. And most states at that time had laws against any kind of sex between blacks and white people. Hard to imagine now. But that's the way it was. And jazz music was always accompanied by marijuana, and some of these white women would get pregnant with a black baby of these jazz, and that was unthinkable, unthinkable to have that sort of thing happening. And many of those black jazz musicians were chased out of town. Some were even lynched. Some were even killed by vindictive white people banded together to protect the maidenhood of white young daughters of theirs. Yet, all the music of jazz is about marijuana. Hip-hop artists all use marijuana. Every reggae artist smoked marijuana. Rock and roll musicians, most of those smoke marijuana. Green Day, I mean, it's endless. I could go into them all, but I'm just trying to pick the cutting-edge, brilliant people who smoke marijuana. But you know, you might even say, well, at least there's country music. Country music's not about weed. Oh yeah, it is. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Toby Keith, even a redneck like Toby Keith, whom I kind of like myself, has a wonderful song called Smoking Weed with Willie Nelson. And it's a wonderful song. He smokes pot all the time. Hank Williams Jr. and Hank Williams III smoke pot. I've met him myself.